of the issues that should be very important in the church continued even through that decade. But anyway, the decade, when it ended in 1998 in Harare Assembly, where there was a big, commemoration of the end, there were so many stories that were shared. As you know, when women meet and men, so many times stories help to put a face to issues and to put a face to certain concerns that we experience. And so some of the stories confirmed that actually not only were women's issues trivialized, and not really like the nature of our life, where we have dualistic understanding of the public space and the space. And so many times when the private, actually the issues that concern women are given names that confine them to the private, like domestic violence. Domestic violence, therefore, it is for the private, it's for the domestic, it's not for the public. And so those were affirmed that the issues of women were still confined to the private. But something also came up, was that actually violence against women was alive in the church as well. And how do you deal with it? And from it and from all the other discussions, it was then said that probably there should be a focus on that, to deal with that. But of course, there were other arenas that also contributed to the declaration of the decade to overcome violence in 2001 to 2010, which was also connected to the UN decade. So for the decade, I want to just quickly finish. For the decade to overcome violence, the program on women in church and society decided to focus on addressing violence against women. And that was important because most of the times we were talking of overcoming violence like it is a theoretical or maybe just armed violence, not really looking at some of the expressions of violence that were confined to the private, as I said. So for us, when I took up this position in WCC in 2007, it was actually towards the end of the decade. So we focused on addressing violence against women by doing 2 processes, 2 strategies, and 5 methodologies. Okay? 2 processes that we decided to carry out to address violence against women were working with women on what we called women's spiritualities of resilience, healing, and wholeness. How do women cope in the face of violence? And what are mechanisms that they've put in place that keeps them resisting this violence? And what are the spiritual resources that they have developed that we can learn from them as good practice? We were doing this back to back with men and positive masculinity. 80% of violence against women is caused directly by men. Most of the times, men who claim to love women. And so how do we deal with that so that we have men who are allies, who it's not every man who causes violence against women. There are so many men who really like to work against that. So how do we create that space so that they are also involved in addressing violence against women? So through the process of men and masculinity, positive masculinities, we were able to work with men. And so we had different men from different categories. And so the methodologies that we were using were dependent on what we harvested from working with men and women. So this back-to-back process happened from 2007, and in 2010 we published a workbook on men and positive masculinities workbook, which I am ashamed to say that coming here, I passed through my house just for less than 10 hours because I was coming from Crete. And I arrived in the evening, and then I slept, and then I almost overslept. He would have texted me. My flight was at 6:30 in the morning, so I had to leave my house at 5 o'clock. And so I couldn't bring the books. You forgive me for that. But so we produced that manual, and we have been using it. We have been translating it into different languages. The two strategies that we decided to work with were to have a group what we called movers for gender justice and peace. Movers are men and women who themselves in their work they are addressing issues about gender justice. And so we have men, like an example of the men that we have is one man is from White Ribbon Campaign. How many of you know White Ribbon Campaign? White Ribbon Campaign. Thank you. At least one man knows about it. White Ribbon Campaign was born in around 1989 in Canada. 1989, some of you who know the history, 14 women were shot dead at university in Montreal because they had been registered for engineering course. And this guy who failed to qualify to be registered came to the university and asked all the men to leave the room. And the 14 women who had been registered for engineering course, he shot each one of them dead. Because he said engineering was not for women. If it was not for him, he would not have women have it. So the 6 men in Canada who started reflecting on that said, you know, there's something wrong about the way we understand being men. And they said, we have to do something about it. So they formed the White Ribbon Campaign as an organization where men work and they take a pledge never to remain silent in the face of violence against women, to do something about it. So they have campaigns like walk in her shoes for 1 mile. So one day they will walk in high-heeled shoes like the ones I have on, and they will struggle just to feel how women feel, you know, crazy women who walk in high heels. But they have so many strategies, and so one of them is a man from White Ribbon Campaign. So one methodology was to have these movers. So these movers, they facilitate the 2 processes that we carry out. But also, what they also do is, because in their own country or wherever they come from, they do these things, then they carry this and they try to spread and try to build a movement of gender justice. The second strategy has to do with, you know, the link of advocacy as awareness raising and advocacy as policy making. So, because both are important. So we work with the UN on the Commission of Status of Women and other channels to make sure that such things also influence policy. So these are the 2 strategies we've been using. And the 5 methodologies, quickly, I'll just mention. The first one was we have been using contextual Bible study methodologies. Some of you are aware of it. There is actually a workshop on contextual Bible study methodology. Is it this time or sometime? But it's a brainchild of liberation theology where you allow the reader interacts with the biblical text. The context of the biblical text dialogues with the context of the reader. And it's a very interesting biblical study and methodology which helps you to really actually bring the Bible to you, to your situation, and to read it in a way that it brings liberation rather than being used to confine and to discriminate. And the second methodology that we have been using is what we call forum theater. Forum theater is also a brainchild of liberation struggle, in that forum theater reenacts experiences. So you create a skit that reflects on the experiences of the people. And then you reflect on it and you find ways of addressing it. And the forum theater, actually, we have been using it especially to read biblical text, to reenact biblical texts like the stories of 2 Samuel 13, where David's son Amnon raped David's daughter Tamar. We have reenacted those and read that text to find out what it says to us in the case of violence against women. The third one we have been using has been radio programming. One of the movers is actually a radio announcer. So he uses the radio to bring up programs on men and masculinity and all that. The fourth that we've been using has been what I would call dancing liberation. The mover, one of the movers, is a former Bollywood dancer. So we recruited her because of her own experience that she has been helping people in the case of violence against women, especially sexual violence. So she uses dance to bring, alive the stories and also to see how to carry on to healing. The fifth is White Ribbon Campaign. So White Ribbon Campaign, we've been using that to challenge people to take a pledge, never to remain silent in the face of violence and the like. But now, because of this history that I've shared with you, we are going to Busan for the assembly next year. And this is the 10th assembly for World Council of Churches. But 2013 also, if you remember the history I've told you, is also 60 years since the program on the cooperation of women and men was formed in World Council of Churches. So how do we celebrate that? The pre-assembly has been a pre-assembly of women. But 60 years down the road, and with the reality of violence against women as still the expression that so many women experience, even in Switzerland where we work, the research, Lausanne University carried out a research to show that actually 3 out of every 5 women in Switzerland have testified to have experienced one form of violence against women to another. So how do we create this space of a pre-assembly? Do we stick to just women talking to each other, or do we open the gate to a point where we can have a conversation between men and women as a celebration of the 60th anniversary? There have been different reactions, but I just want to say that we have, because of this understanding of unity as community of women and men, we are trying to see if it could also be reflected in the pre-assembly, the 10th pre-assembly, as a community of women and men. Because what we are, we have to become. But how do we become a community of women and men when even right now as I talk, there isn't 50% representation of women and men in the ecumenical movement? We have not reached that. The discussion tables are still not very much balanced when it comes to women and also other representations. So we are trying to see whether we could have a day just for women, because it's 2 days, the pre-assembly. Maybe we have one day which is only women, and then the second day, it is women in conversation with men. So we are trying to see so that we do not jeopardize on the aim of creating space for women, because the pre-assemblies have been a space created especially that women could network, they could share their stories, they could feel, they could create a safe space for themselves. But 60 years down the road, we know the church is not just women, and we cannot continue sustaining a space of women away from the common space. So how do we compromise on this? We have different ideas, but it is still in a making, because when I went to Korea in May to try to test it out, the Korean women felt they were not ready for it to be a community of women and men. They felt this is the space where at least they can be themselves and they can make decisions, and they don't think they want to give it up. So how should we celebrate the 60th anniversary of this work? Are we a community of women and men yet? Are we? I want to stop here and hear if there are questions and comments and whatever else. Thank you.